Welcome to session 9 of the first stage of Your Way recovery. Over the last few sessions, we've talked about the states of consciousness that drive addiction. Over the next few sessions, I want to go deeper into the impact those states of consciousness have on our suffering. And I want to, again, go back to that brain chemistry class to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to have chunks of that brain chemistry class over the next few weeks again. And then those will be followed by a take-home tool. And the take-home tool will really connect to moving us forward. So let's go ahead and begin our centering practice for today. Closing my eyes, I bring my focus to my breathing. And I take one slow, deep inhale. And follow it with one slow, long exhale. Again, I feel my belly expand as I allow breath to fill my lungs. And contract again as I release it. One more time with focused intent. I breathe in. And I breathe out. Breathing deeply into this moment, I find my center. From this place, I release everything that has been in my life. I know that I can do nothing to change the past. It is just a memory. So I let it go. I let the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of who I've been fall from my mind, and I bring myself fully to this moment, the place where doing exists, the place where I have the power to choose. And as I let go of the past, I let go of the future as well. I know the future is not yet written. I know who I am is not defined by who I've been, but what I do with myself now. Allowing myself to find the eternal now, I know anything is possible here. I know infinite potential exists in this moment, and that the power of creating the life I choose happens right here, right now. Anything can happen from here. Anything is possible in this moment. So I open myself to it, I allow it to be, and I move forward with calm and centered confidence. The centering question for this week is, if I could truly believe in my own power to create a healthy, thriving life, if I believed I could create a life that served my happiness and the happiness of those around me, what would I do with this moment? Who would I be? Who will I be today to make my life better? If you would like to finish your practice here today, you can pause the video and go to the centering practice in your course to answer today's centering question. For those who are ready to continue, we will do that now by going directly into the Introduction to Brain Chemistry course. So we're going to start our process with understanding the brain's relation to consciousness. So consciousness for us is how we experience our reality. The first thing I want to talk about is the effective threat of imminent death. So threat of imminent death doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to kill you. So this applies to the fact that if a tiger is chasing you, there is a threat of imminent death. Now, being primates, we have two other threats that are potentials, in fact, that are coded into our DNA that run us as much as seeing a snake does. And that is safety and familiarity, as well as social survival, right? So two things primates have to have. Primates are the weakest of all predators. And so in that, there have been a couple of mechanisms that have been encoded into our systems to help try and keep us safe. So our brain is going to register that I have a threat of death first, and if I'm losing anything socially. So this is why, like, if it's the end of a relationship, if we're not having the right social status, anything that's driven socially. Now, in the primate level, this just means tribe. We have to have enough of a tribe to feel safe. But in human development, this has now become the right car, the right job, the right kind of relationship, the right group, the right religion, the right political party, you name it, right? So these are all social tribes for us. So any threat of losing our social position becomes a threat of imminent death. The second one, safety and familiarity. This is why a lot of people resist change. This is just a primal reaction of the brain. Because safety, we needed it, right? You had to know which berries to eat. You had to know who looked familiar, so you knew who you couldn't trust, who you couldn't feel safe around. You had to know what tribal boundaries were. All these things that we had to know as these systems were development. Safety and familiarity was huge. However, with 7.5 billion people on the planet, there is constant change. So we can't stay in what's familiar. So this has become a constant trigger for people, right? So when we talk about the trigger of threat of imminent death, we're not just talking about a tiger chasing us. Now, the brain's going to react like a tiger's chasing us. But this could be losing social standing or losing familiarity, having to go into something that we're not familiar with. And then what this does is this triggers the brain chemical norepinephrine. It also triggers epinephrine and histamine. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but the norepinephrine specifically is stored in the synaptic vesicles and released under fight or flight trigger. So that's the state of consciousness we're talking about, is fight or flight. So this threat of imminent death triggers norepinephrine, which puts us in a fight or flight state. Now we have norepinephrine all the time. It's what makes us awake and alert and be able to focus and concentrate on things. But this is an additional release, right? So you're getting extra norepinephrine in the system. And again, I'll talk chemicals more in a minute. And the resulting state of experience of life is suffering. Every single thing you would define in your life as suffering is the result of a fight or flight trigger. This means if you're sad, if you're angry, if you're depressed, if you're frustrated, if you're sore, if you don't have motivation, emotional, mental, physical pain, all of these things are states of suffering, and they're all the results of these triggers. I'm going to get a little bit more into that. So we're going to talk first about the fight or flight state and what the body does. So at a physical level, what's happening is we have an enlarged amygdala. So the amygdala is the thing that triggers fight or flight. So it's the thing that triggers that release of norepinephrine, that extra release. The amygdala is where all of our emotional memory is, and it is the thing that is measuring that threat. And so what happens if a person has what I call an overactive fight or flight response. They have an enlarged amygdala. Okay. And so what's happening is that means the amygdala is having a bit of a hair trigger. So it tends to mean we get triggered into that state of suffering easily, right? States of feeling insecure, conditions like PTSD, depression, anger, emotionally reactive is a really good way to think of an enlarged amygdala. If we're really super emotionally reactive, that's a state of the amygdala being triggered because it triggers heightened emotional response. So in this, again, the brain chemical that's released is norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter. And in this, I'm going to talk about the 5 major neurotransmitters. If I don't talk about it, it means it's a secondary transmitter. If you get the 5 right, the rest of the brain works well. So I focus on the 5 major neurotransmitters. So norepinephrine being the first one. The other 2 that are released with norepinephrine are epinephrine and histamine. So these are 2 more of the 5 major neurotransmitters. Now, epinephrine, we tend to understand what epinephrine does. So like I said, norepinephrine makes us awake and alert. So again, in a fight or flight response, we want more alert, more focus, we want to be as awake as possible, right? Because consider the fact that when you're in the state, regardless of your trigger, as far as your brain is concerned, a tiger's chasing you. So if you're imagining trying to run away from a tiger, your brain is going to have to be really alert, really focused, right? Really sharp. And so that's what norepinephrine does. Epinephrine is adrenaline, right? Norepinephrine is sometimes called noradrenaline. So epinephrine being adrenaline, we all understand that state of fight or flight, right? Where your heart races, your blood vessels contract so that you increase blood pressure, your body pumps out a bunch of sugar, right? Everybody talks about gaining weight from stress because your body pumps a bunch of sugar so your muscles can use that sugar to run harder or to fight better, run faster, right? So you pump out a bunch of sugar. All these things happen. You have that rush of adrenaline in your system. The other neurotransmitter that's released, that's one of the 5 major, is histamines. And this is what I want to talk about more today, that even than epinephrine, because we get that fight or flight response. But histamine is a thing that we often don't talk about. And I want to talk about what histamine does when we get triggered. So what's happening is the brain triggers this fight or flight response. All of a sudden, we're pumping a bunch of adrenaline, and the brain's consuming a lot of energy using the norepinephrine for focus. So a lot of times you'll hear statements like we only use 10% of our brain at a time. That's inaccurate. We use our whole brain, but we only produce enough electricity in our body to use about 10% at a time. So the body is an electrical machine. It creates electrical currents. It creates energy. Now, it only has a certain allotted amount of energy based off what we've created, right? And so the brain, when we're using all of a sudden all this adrenaline, right? We're increasing our heart rate. We're pumping a bunch of adrenaline and norepinephrine. And so what the brain does is start shutting down other systems in the body to conserve energy. The brain will literally kill us trying not to die because and it's just systematically doing what it knows to do. We don't have enough energy, so I'm going to start shutting down systems, right? So the systems it's shutting down begin with H1. This is our allergic reaction. Most people understand allergic reaction when it comes to histamine, right? We've taken antihistamines for seasonal allergies, or if somebody has a strong allergic reaction, they might get a shot from an EpiPen, that's epinephrine, or they might get Benadryl, right? These are antihistamines that we know about, which is the allergic reaction response. So what's happening is if a tiger's chasing you, your brain doesn't care if you're allergic to things, right? It needs to conserve energy so it can run from the tiger. Now, I'm going to have listed below where these histamines are stored in the body. I'm not going to talk about that. That's just there for people with specific medical conditions. They know these terms. And so if a person has certain problems with certain, like if they have smooth muscle problems, they know about that. And so I'm just letting people know this is the histamine that's being affected. So you have H1 allergic response. The second thing that shuts down is our GI tract. This is the H2 histamine, right? Fight or flight or rest and digest. The body doesn't want to be digesting when we're running from a tiger. Also, digestion takes an enormous amount of energy in the system. So the body shuts down the GI tract, right, when we're triggered. The third thing it shuts down is our central nervous system. Now, I don't know that it necessarily shuts them down in this order. I'm just saying the third thing because it's the H3. It might shut down in a different order for you. But this is our central nervous system. So basically, we're shutting down the ability to feel what's happening in the body. Because if you're running from a tiger and you're running through a forest and you're getting cut, your body doesn't want to feel that right now. It has to be able to focus. So our body shuts off those receptors from the central nervous system. This is why a lot of times when people have a car accident, they may not feel it for a couple days, right? It's not that they weren't injured the day of the accident. It wasn't that the body wasn't in pain the day of the accident. It's that the body shuts down the pain receptors as part of conserving energy because of the trauma. So the fourth thing it's going to shut down is our immune response, right? So this is why if people are stressed a lot, they tend to get sick, right? But immune response, again, I have to worry about my immune system if I'm running from a tiger. These are all systems that use energy, so the brain is shutting them down to conserve that energy. So what I want to talk about is what happens when we get histamine imbalance. So histamine imbalance means we might have an excess of histamines, a lesser amount of histamines. It doesn't mean a malfunction. It means the brain is shutting it off because we're triggered. We're triggering too much. But it's not a malfunction, but it's causing an imbalance because of the amount of times we're triggered. If we have an overactive fight or flight response, we're triggering too much. And so the body's shutting off systems, turning it back on, and it's going back and forth. And so it creates an imbalance. Systems and conditions that result from histamine imbalance are weight disorders, skin disorders, GI disorders, anaphylaxis, ulcers, allergies, food disorders, motion sickness, leaky gut, nutrient deficiencies, blood vessel dilation, bacterial infestations, autoimmune disease, neurological disease, hormone imbalances, mood disorders, sleep wake disorders, cognitive function disorders, cancer, autism, overall body pain, seizure disorders, respiratory disorders, and asthma. Nearly every illness known to man is the result of a histamine imbalance caused by an overactive fight or flight response. The pharmaceutical companies know this. This is why when you see pharmaceuticals, a pharmaceutical that treats cancer might have the same side effects as a pharmaceutical that treats depression because they're approaching a histamine. They're trying to turn the histamines back on, right? And we're going to talk about why that can't completely work, but it does work to an extent, right? If I take Benadryl, it's going to stop an intense allergic response in my system. If I take an antibiotic, it's going to help my immune system. If I take something for pain relief, right? People take things for depression all the time and feel improvement. MAOIs worked for me initially, right? Until I got to the point where I no longer needed them, until I had more balance. So again, what's happening at a physical level is we have an enlarged amygdala, which is creating an overactive fight or flight response, which is shutting down systems in our body, which is then creating pain and sickness. Now, what's happening at this point is we are dying. So we've triggered a threat of imminent death, but now we're actually dying because the brain is shutting off critical systems that we need to live. And especially if you think of the fact, if you think of how much time in a day you spend stressed or depressed or anxious or unhappy, all of these are the results of that trigger. And if we're in them too long, our systems are shut off, right? So what happens on a mental level is we feel powerless, right? We have no control. We are subject to external conditions. We have depression, anxiety, stress, PTSD, addiction, mental illness. What's happening on an emotional level is we're vulnerable. Now understand the word vulnerable. The word vulnerable is used a lot to be authentic and raw. That's not what vulnerable means. Vulnerable means at risk, under threat. right? If we're vulnerable to something, we're at risk. And so we can feel, we'll feel emotionally vulnerable when we're triggered in a fight or flight response. We'll have anger, sadness, fear, pain, insecurity, lack of motivation. We feel expendable and alone. So basically, everything that's a negative experience of life is a result of this trigger. It's not part of our natural homeostasis. It means that we're in a primal fight or flight response. So again, so we get threat of imminent death. We trigger norepinephrine, epinephrine, and histamine, which is a fight or flight response, fight or flight state of consciousness, which then creates suffering in our life. So that's our first state, is the state of suffering. Again, the brain thinks we're dying. It triggers norepinephrine, triggering a fight or flight response, which creates the suffering. We have to remember that. Suffering does not create fight or flight, right? Fight or flight is often called the stress chemical. Stress doesn't trigger fight or flight. We're feeling stress because the fight or flight mechanism's been triggered. I mean, that's the biggest thing to get, right? Okay, so that's a deeper understanding of what this fight or flight trigger is really doing and why the brain is triggered to relieve it. This is why our brain wants to relieve our suffering. You can see it's destroying our body, it's destroying our mind, it's destroying our life. And so even though these addictive patterns can cause us to cause more destruction to our life, we do need to remember that every dysfunctional thing we do to feel safe. It is because we are feeling a threat of some kind subconsciously. And so the brain wants to relieve that state. It will do anything it can to get out of that triggered state. So next session, we're going to talk a little bit about the rest and digest state, like the state that we're going into as we come out of fight or flight, the state that we're craving. And we're going to take those practices that we've used to really begin to measure and observe ourselves and see if we can't begin to recognize these states so that we can do practices to eliminate them. So that's what we'll do next session. For the rest of today, what I'd like to continue with is this week's take-home tool. This week's take-home tool is mild exercise. Now, we don't want strenuous exercise here. I'm not asking you to start a major workout program. In fact, we don't want strenuous exercise. I know for some, and I used to do this, is when I was triggered and angry or had all that intense energy, I wanted to go work out and called it actually work out the stress. The problem is the muscles are contracted when we're in these triggered states. And so when we go do an intense workout, we run the risk of injury. So if you want to do an intense workout, make sure you're already in a calm state, a rest and digest state before you continue. If you work your muscles while they're in a state of tension, you do really risk damaging ligaments, damaging muscle tears, things like that. So it's better to keep it light. So you can go for a walk, you can stretch, do something like yoga or Tai Chi, Qigong. I really like these practices because they both squeeze the muscle, which helps with the release of excess norepinephrine, but in addition to that, they stretch the muscle. They're really designed for changing the state of the body, which then triggers that rest and digest response. So even if it's just, okay, I'm stressed, I'm going to just do a couple of stretches. Whether I'm stretching my neck or my legs, I might just decide to stand up and reach for my toes. Just really simple stretches, nothing major, nothing that you need to talk yourself out of because it feels like too much. Literally stretching for 5 minutes is really great. But if you do it for your full 20-minute exercise, you're going to gain a lot of physical benefit as well as calming the mind. The other part of this physical activity is chores and yard work. So this is something simple like doing the dishes or getting your hands in the dirt, right? A lot of people clean or work in the yard to calm their nerves. You're just doing the same thing again, right? We know our nerves mean we're in that triggered state. And I also recommend just doing one small task. So if you have a lot of tasks around the house that need to be done and maybe you avoid those, try just doing one small thing. It doesn't need to be a lot. But clutter or incomplete tasks cause stress to our brain. Our brain doesn't forget that to-do list. It can also drive subconscious feelings of failure. So you just want to accomplish something. And even something small builds feelings of success and it soothes the mind. One of the things I do is every time I stand up, I work from home or I write, and every time I get up to go do something, I'll just do one small thing along the way. So I just like to maybe pick up a couple of things, wash a few dishes, dust one area of the room. Before long, I'm doing more and feeling a lot better, but it does a few things. First of all, I'm just doing it in small bits, like literally 5 to 10 minutes when I get up. When I'm getting up anyway to do something like make a meal. While I'm doing that, I'll just tack on one small thing. It has two effects. One is it progresses me forward, which builds feelings of success. So if I'm doing that, then maybe by the end of the day, I have an entire area straightened and I feel better. So the space being clear helps me feel better, reduces the stress. In addition to that, I'm getting my practice in. I'm doing what I need to do to improve my brain function. And so it's a really great practice. Remember to track how you feel. So check in with how you're feeling before you do the practice and notice how you feel after. It's amazing that I can pause and just do one little tiny area for like 5 or 10 minutes. If I track how I feel before I do that and after, I'm amazed by how much impact that has on how I feel. As we go forward, we're going to do some serious tracking of that and some serious manipulation of the brain as we go into the next stage of the process. So I've included a log this week that will help you begin to start to do that practice of checking in, doing a practice, and then checking in again after. And you should be kind of building a list of practices. I'll be including a log for that as well. But this week we'll do the tracking log and doing just tiny projects or going for a walk or things like that. I want you to really track. This is an easy one to do and track and know that whether or not it's having impact. So that's it for this week. That's your take-home tool, your centering your class. I will look forward to next session where we're going to talk about the rest and digest state. I wish you tremendous success on your journey, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day.